grazing mainly by wild animals in the backcountry. So there was an outfit set up based on the North American Forest and Range Experiment Stations. It was called the Forest and Range Experiment Station, which was to look at the condition and trend of forests in this backcountry, not just forests, shrublands and grassland, and to try and determine what we could do about that. And there were 4 sections. One was the survey section that went out every year doing the monitoring, seeing what was going on. Biggest problem was animals, so the second one was the animal section, looking at introduced animals.
Which animals? Deer, basically.
Deer, chamois, tahr, pigs, goats.
Chamois, tahr, what's that?
Chamois is an antelope from Central Europe, and tahr is a goat from the Himalayas, all introduced.
Yeah.
And also ordinary goats, plus possums, pigs, hares, rabbits, the lot. So the animal section. The third one was the hydrology section, looking at water flows, how they would modified by different vegetation covers and loss thereof. And the fourth one was the revegetation section, i.e. what can we do about it? And this was the area that was selected for revegetation because it had ski field roads going right up to tree line, and also you can see there's a little bit of erosion going on at places like that. But the understanding then, the thinking then, was that all the downstream ill effects caused by debris going down was mostly originating from the catchments, whereas we now know it probably came more from riparian areas further down in the catchments, although that's obviously where it eventually came from. So the revegetation section, and that thing there summarises 30 years with myself and Gordon Baker wrote that, and that there is what you can see over there, from that time. So we tested a whole host of different species, and the list is there, you know. We don't need to look through that now, but basically the introduced conifers were by far the most successful, and contorta was listed right up the top there. There was about 6 or 8 species which were really successful. So that's where a lot of the planting was carried out, and here what we can see over there, the taller trees, that was a provenance trial of Scots pine. There was inland contorta and coastal contorta. Down below there is, we found that not of the introduced species of conifers by far the best, but also some of the broadleaves. Birch, betula was good, and alder. And that there is a birch trial, one that's been sprayed, has the early autumn colours. That would have the most comprehensive species list of any birch trial in the country, and I'm afraid this is all dockland, Department of Conservation, as far as they're concerned. Anything exotic is out. So there was no question about whether that's spreading or not. It was sprayed, full stop.
Have you seen any birch spread?
Oh yeah, have done, but it's localised. I mean, we've got birch spread here, you see, it's coming in here. Yeah, but it doesn't tend to go far. It doesn't have big wings like the conifer seed. But anyway, and maybe someone will come up and say, oh, a certain birch from so-and-so looks really good for some extract. Well, we had a trial which prepares a whole bloody lot, but it's gone now, I'm afraid. Eucalypts, particularly the Australian alpine ones. There's a eucalypt trial over here, you can see remnants of it. And see the tall, above the sprayed beech, birch at least, you can see some tall coniferous trees that look a little grey. Well, that's another eucalypt trial, which is obviously also been sprayed.
Any spread from that?
A little, snow gum, a little, but bugger all. Once again, extremely localised.
So one snow gum naturalised from the conifer. Naturalised snow gum.
Well, you'll see a few up here, but only very closely associated with the seed source.
The birch is remarkable though, because that produces just buckets and buckets of
seeds,
seeds, and they certainly blow.
Yeah.
I mean, they may not have big wings, but they're very small and light.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, they play a lot.
Yeah.
That they do.
Yeah, but I've never found, well I have actually, if you travelled through there all day walking around, you would find the odd birch, but bugger all. Considering, as you say, the amount of seed and the proximity and the relative exposure of it.
So we have no knowledge of the mycorrhizae on the birch, on the alnus, on the eucalypts, on the, I mean, like all of these things you're seeing, with absolutely no data on what's going on below ground, except for Pinus contorta and Holly's work will give us the Doug fir, which are obviously the 2 biggest and a little bit of information on.
I can see
on
some
Niagara.
effects like why the animals are not invading. Nothing like I can see some soil.
Well,
Well, there's
aspect.
one right here.
Exactly.
But like-
There's
but
a
now,
little
but like-
green alder
there are
right
few,
there.
but like, yeah.
But and I remember in the 80s, my boss taking me to where we were planting alder. Well, let's go back a step. Contorta was right in the mix, but after the 60s, people realised it spread, and no contorta, apart from the odd trial, but no erosion control contorta was planted up here. I started here in 71. I never planted erosion control contorta. We switched to mountain pine, Pinus mugo, the shrubby one we were talking about before. And that's what's mostly up the top. See over here on the far slope, most of that, which has been sprayed along the margin, most of that's just mugo. So we went from contorta to mugo, which we said didn't spread because we used to collect seed from mature plants here, grow it in the nursery and replant it, and we never saw natural regeneration. You bloody well do now. It's spreading all over the show. And similarly with the green alder, I remember my boss taking me up to where we planted a scree with that and saying, look, natural regeneration, gee, that's magnificent. And you see it now. Maybe that has hybridized with other alders we have bought in, and maybe there's a bit of hybridization that goes into that, explain that spread. But that work went on from the mid-50s or late 50s right through to about late 80s, when the funding was starting to disappear from this sort of work. And we abandoned our base here in the late 80s, actually sold it to Landcare Research after a hell of a scrap as to who should get it. And we're bloody glad we missed out on that, actually, because with that went a whole lot of maintenance costs and things which we couldn't have maintained.
And now we rented that to the Kiwi Restoration Group.
Yeah, that's right. So, and then with 60s was the realisation of contorta, and then with time became the realisation of other species also spread. All the spread you see over there, and you'll see a hell of a lot more, of course, if we go up higher, which we can do. Most of that we went through. First of those appeared in 75, because you can age the tree. And we went through and looked at the age classes in the 90s, and there was really only two major age classes which had arrived there from the contorta plantings on top of this hill. And then the subsequent one was mostly infilling from those trees which were left in sight. And from then on, the switch has gone on to wilding control, not just here but everywhere, where DOC spends more money on wilding control. They did a few years back than any other species, invasive species, particularly in the East and South Islands, where it is most of the problem. And now we're seeing the latest techniques of aerial spraying, which have only just been perfected in the last year or two, or still being perfected, being applied here operationally. And we're also seeing harvesting to raise money to remove the contorta over there, and that's what we've seen back there. Harvesting of some of our original trials of Douglas fir, ponderosa pine and larch to raise money for the implementation of this control plan over here. So it's done the whole circle from promotion through to active removal. But if you took contorta out of the mix here, we wouldn't be standing here today. We would actually, as researchers, we'd be standing to look at the old Douglas fir and alder. But in terms of operational concern about wildings in the Craigieburn, well, people will say, well, what's the problem? Because if there was no contorta, there's 8 species present over there, not just contorta, but they're a very, very minor component. And the one that, and nobody these days plants contorta, mugo, larch, obviously birch, alder. The one that they do plant a lot of is Douglas fir, and that is where the real focus is starting to turn out. And the second most common species you would see over there would be the mountain pine, and then probably the third most common species you see over there would be the Douglas fir, particularly close to the fir.
But as you point out also, there's not necessarily a strong effect of removing trees that are present already. So like the plant contorta, shelter belt. There's lots of Doug fir shelter belts. You go down to the beautiful station up this way at Avoca Homestead. There's enormous radiata that are seeding in, but they're contentious about whether they should be removed or not because they're so tall, such landmark trees.
It will not look nice if they cut them. Like kind of like there's like aesthetic problem with that. I feel like it's complex. Like in Bariloche, they cut many of the pines like in the city, and people was bitching about it because like, it looks ugly, you know. Like
well, there's certainly complaints arriving now, as you could imagine. 99.9% of people that see this area drive through. They're on the way to the west coast. They don't leave the road. They see this. It's bloody obvious. And we're starting to get phone calls saying, "What the bloody hell's going on?"
it's complex.
And well, this doctor gets the phone calls, but, and they get surprisingly few actually. But there is
People complaining.
It's interesting. You would think it would, I mean, generate a bit more interest from people ringing up and saying what's going on. And, it's interesting. They don't get that many really, for an obvious thing, like right off the road.
Well, exactly the same thing happened behind Queenstown, where they've got Douglas fir, which has both been seeded and spread, and they've actually production thinned it. And even at one stage, with chainsaws working within audible distance of the major tourist centre in the South Island, and they got the major complaint was when the big Russian helicopter came in to lift the logs up. But prior to that, bugger all.
What's that?
There's a huge